There are moments in many relationships when you hesitate before speaking. Not because you don't care, not because the issue is insignificant, but because you're unsure about how your words will be received. You replay the scenario in your head, you adjust your tone, you soften the edges. Sometimes you decide it's easier to simply not say anything at all. That hesitation may feel minor, yet it reshapes the atmosphere of the relationship. When partners begin filtering themselves to avoid tension, conversations become polite but lose integrity. Concerns move underground, misunderstandings occur, resentment quietly accumulates. Intimacy rarely collapses overnight. It erodes through subtle patterns that go unnoticed until distance is already present. Most couples assume that safety in a relationship means the absence of physical harm. I would never hurt her, you might think. Of course she's safe. And that assumption is clearly understandable. But emotional safety isn't the absence of physical harm. It's emotional security at its best. Emotional safety is the confidence that you can speak freely without fear of ridicule, dismissal, escalation, or withdrawal. It's the reassurance that difficult conversations won't cost you your connection with your significant other. When emotional safety is compromised, people begin to self-censor. They measure their words carefully. They anticipate reaction. They protect themselves. And over time, openness narrows, tension thickens, and trust weakens. This is where the need for emotional intelligence becomes essential. Emotional intelligence is the capacity to recognize what you say and do impacts another person's emotional state or sense of connection. More precisely, it's the awareness of how your tone, timing, and wording lands in the emotional world of the person in front of you. In relationships, emotional intelligence determines whether love is experienced as safety or as a strain. Many conflicts aren't necessarily driven by the issue being discussed, but by how the emotions are handled in reference to the issue. When emotional awareness is low, frustration spills into blame, withdrawal, or defensiveness. When emotional intelligence is present, conversations remain grounded and supportive. Now, from a gender intelligence perspective, this dynamic expresses itself differently for men than it does for women. Many men instinctively equate safety with loyalty or physical commitment. Women primarily experience safety through emotional attunement and responsiveness. When these definitions are misaligned, both partners may believe they're offering safety, while the other quietly feels unprotected. I often explain to the couples that I work with that physical vulnerability is an extension of emotional vulnerability. If she doesn't feel emotionally open with you, she will not feel at ease physically. The closeness experienced in the bedroom is shaped long before that moment in everyday conversations, in how disagreement is handled, in whether honesty feels welcomed or defended against. When emotional safety is protected, difficult conversations become manageable and they stop feeling so threatening. When emotional safety is protected, couples remain open and receptive towards one another and engaged in the relationship. The relationship grows past tension as opposed to being damaged by it. Awareness alone, however, is not fully curative. Once we recognize that our communication directly shapes emotional safety, follow through is required. That responsibility calls for a greater precision and intention in how we speak, specifically during those moments of stress or disagreement. This is where clean communication emerges. Well, welcome to Mars Venus Coaching. I am your gender intelligence coach, Clay Smith. And in today's episode, we're going to examine the different ways between connection centered language and self protective language, and how everyday phrases can either strengthen that emotional safety or quietly create distance. Specifically, we're going to walk through 8 reactive language traps that sabotage our connection. These are subtle, familiar patterns that often feel justified in the moment, yet consistently activate defensiveness and erodes openness. For each trap, we're going to walk through a simple 6-part framework so you can clearly see what drives the pattern, how it lands with your partner, how you can do differently things to better communicate, and how you can ask your partner for change when we feel like they're the ones using these ineffective patterns. We're going to take a look at how small, subtle shifts in tone, in timing, in wording can transform the relational dynamic. By the end of this episode, you're going to walk away with practical replacements that you can use immediately to protect that emotional safety and strengthen your connection. Now, before diving into these traps, let's establish how to work through them constructively. I want to let you know that this episode is not about correcting your partner in real time. It's not about monitoring one another's language in the middle of a heated discussion. Moments like that are when they're approached, they just create shame and defensiveness. Self protective language tends to surface during moments of stress or urgency. Now, meaningful change is far more likely to occur when those patterns are revisited later, outside the context of the emotionally charged topic at hand, and in a calm, intentional setting. This is why tools like the relationship check in and the concepts explored in one of my earlier episodes on how to potty train your partner matter so much here. Behavior change doesn't happen effectively in the middle of that poop on the carpet moment. It happens later in a calm, intentional setting where both partners feel safe enough to reflect instead of get defensive. For a more deeper understanding of how to encourage those shifts without creating defensiveness, I want to recommend watching those earlier episodes on the relationship check-in and how to potty train your partner. Together, these tools explain how to invite your partner towards connection-centered language in a way that protects that emotional safety. So, as we move through these phrases in this episode, think of them as patterns to notice, not problems to confront immediately. The goal is to not interrupt your partner mid-sentence, but to remember the phrase, return to it later within a relationship check-in. During that check-in, the request is simple and respectful. You're not asking your partner to stop doing something wrong. You're asking them for a different way of communicating that helps you stay emotionally open and connected. Each phrase that we explore today will end with an emotionally intelligent way to ask your partner to change their behavior to better support you. Approached this way, clean communication becomes a shared practice rather than a correction. This six-part framework allows both partners to grow together, protect the emotional safety, and replace those self-protective phrases with connection-centered language. So, having laid that foundation, let's get started. The first category of these reactive language traps, that I like to call them, appear as hinting or indirect communication. This often sounds like little sideways comments like, wow, the trash is really getting full. Ooh, it would be nice if someone took it out. Guess I'll just have to do it myself, like always. These statements imply a request, but stop short of making one. The responsibility is implied rather than clearly assigned. Beneath hinting is rarely manipulation in a malicious sense. More often, the speaker's asking for help, but doesn't want to come across as demanding. They may be hoping that their partner will hear the hint, make the move, perform the request without them having to ask. The intention is to preserve harmony, while still also influencing an outcome. However, indirect communication creates ambiguity. The receiving partner may not recognize the hint, may misinterpret it altogether, and may feel subtly criticized. Instead of clarity, tension builds because expectations go unspoken. Also, there is another layer. When someone senses that an outcome is being steered indirectly, our intuition often detects that hidden pressure, even if the task is resolvable. The energy behind it feels manipulative instead of cooperative. Now, from a gender intelligence perspective, many women are socialized to communicate their needs indirectly, especially when they fear being perceived as demanding or needy. Hinting can feel softer or more relational. Many men, however, are conditioned to respond more directly when requests are upfront and honest and clear. They might miss the implication entirely. When that hint is missed, she might feel unseen. When frustration follows, he might feel confused or even unfairly judged. These patterns are shaped by conditioning, not ill intention. Clean communication replaces hence with clarity. Instead of implying the need, state it respectfully and directly. Instead of saying, trash sure does need to get taken out soon, ask your partner directly, would you please take the trash out tonight? Instead of layering a tone of sarcasm around the task, make a clean request without a hidden agenda. Direct communication eliminates the guesswork and removes the subtle pressure that can feel manipulative. Clarity restores trust because it removes the strategy from your interaction with one another. Now, if you frequently have receive hints coming your way, instead of your partner being direct and asking you for what they need or want, address the issue outside of the moment of that interaction in a calm way. The goal is not to accuse your partner of manipulating you, just to advocate for some more transparency. You could say, hey, sometimes when comments are indirect, I'm not sure what you're actually asking for. It would help me stay engaged if you clearly stated your requests. Or, when I sense an outcome is being implied rather than stated, I feel a little pressured. I respond much better when that request is straightforward. This request works because it reduces the confusion, protects emotional safety, and moves the relationship from influence tactics to true partnership. Now, we've just explored the first trap, indirect communication. We talked about what it is, why it happens, how it lands in the emotional world of our partner. That first one is in the midst of hinting and indirect communication. Now let's move to the second framework, the second reactive trap, which is rhetorical questions. These are questions that are not truly seeking information, but making a statement in disguise. Examples like, why would you do that? Do you ever think before you act? Are you serious right now? How hard is it to remember this? These are framed as questions, but they function as criticism. Beneath rhetorical questions is rarely a desire to belittle their partner. More often, the speaker is trying to express some frustration, highlight a concern, and signal that something needs to change. Sometimes their question is an attempt to provoke awareness quicker. Other times, it's an indirect way of expressing disappointment without stating it plainly. The intention is courtesy disguised in a question. Rhetorical questions, though, oftentimes activate defensiveness immediately. Because they imply judgment, the nervous system doesn't register authentic curiosity, it registers accusation. The receiving partner may feel shamed or criticized or like they're being evaluated instead of being understood. Instead of inviting dialogue, rhetorical questions tends to corner their partner. This creates a tensious interaction. Connection is now dismissed because we get reactive and defensive. Under stress, many women may use rhetorical questions as a way to express emotional intensity indirectly, especially when they feel unheard. The question becomes a container for their frustration. Many men tend to hear rhetorical questions as criticism or incompetence-based attacks, which can quickly trigger shutdown or counter-defensiveness. Neither response is malicious. Both are stress responses shaped by conditioning and nervous system wiring. Clean communication removes the disguise. Instead of asking a rhetorical question, state your concern directly and clearly. Rather than, why would you do this? Try, I felt frustrated when that happened, and I just want to understand what led you to this decision. Instead of, do you ever listen? You could try, I didn't feel heard right now. I'd like us to slow the conversation down if that's okay with you. Instead of, are you serious? You could try, that surprised me. I want to learn more. Tell me more about that. These replacements work because they shift from blame and accusation to ownership. Now, if rhetorical questions frequently show up out of your partner's lips, address the pattern outside the conversation that the question was asked. The goal is not to shame the phrasing, but to advocate for more clarity. A clean request might sound something like, "Hey, babe, when questions come my way in a more of a frustrated tone, I tend to feel criticized and shut down. Would you be open to just telling me directly what you're feeling or needing, as opposed to framing it in a question?" Or, "When I hear a rhetorical question, sometimes I feel judged. It would help me stay open if you just stated your concern clearly, rather than framing it as a question." This approach acknowledges the harm, the impact, but invites a shift without a guilt trip, thus preserving emotional safety. Now, the third category of reactive language traps appear as commanding or bossing language. These often show up as short directives such as, "Do this, don't do that, you're not going to, just take care of it, I want you to handle this now." These phrases are especially common in long-term relationships where familiarity has replaced formality. Most people use them automatically without pausing to consider how they land. Bossing removes choice. And when choice disappears, autonomy feels threatened. Even a cooperative partner may feel instructed rather than collaboratively engaged. Over time, these repeated commands subtly replace emotional tone in the relationship. Emotional safety is going to erode. One partner starts to feel like they're their partner's subordinates, and the other one is going to grow frustrated that now there's a parent-child dynamic. Both partners may feel slowly move into self-protection rather than mutual support. From a gender intelligence perspective, these patterns often intensify under stress. Many men are conditioned to move quickly into problem solving mode and get more directive when pressure rises. Many women experience this shift as emotional disconnection rather than support. These responses are learned patterns, not necessarily character flaws. A connection-centered replacement preserves clarity without removing that person's freedom or dignity. Instead of directing behavior, make a respectful request. You could say, "Would you please take care of this today?" Or, "Would you be open to?" Another alternative is, "It would really help me if you would handle this." Small little phrases like, "At your convenience," "Would you have time?" "Would you consider?" make a world of difference. Utilizing these phrases, the task remains clear, but choice is restored and partnership preserved. When you notice commanding or bossing language directed towards you, the goal is not to call your partner out and instruct them on what not to do in the moment of that behavior. Instead, advocate for the kind of language that helps you stay open and engaged. Doing so calmly, and once that emotional intensity has settled, a clean communication request might sound like, "When things feel urgent and directives come at me as commands, I notice I tend to shut down a little bit. Would you be willing to ask me instead? That'll just kind of motivate me even more to want to contribute. Or, I'm, I know you're trying to get some things handled effectively, but would you be open to working on using requests rather than directives? That's just going to help me feel like we're on the same team. These requests work effectively because they acknowledge the intention, the positive intention, but briefly name the negative emotional impact and invite a connection centered alternative without blaming or policing their language. In doing so, this protects that emotional safety while supporting meaningful and sustainable change. Now, the fourth category of reactive language traps appear as absolute language. These statements include phrases like, "you always do this," or "you never listen." Absolutes are sweeping generalizations that frame behavior as permanent and consistent. They move the conversation away from the specific moment and create a character level indictment. Beneath absolute language is rarely exaggeration for its own sake. More often, the speaker is just trying to communicate intensity. The words always and never are used to emphasize how persistent the frustration feels in the moment. Sometimes absolutes arise when someone feels that previous attempts to address the issue have gone unnoticed. The intention is to be taken seriously, but absolute language immediately activates defensiveness. The nervous system doesn't hear emotional intensity, it hears accusation. It hears being blamed. When someone tells the other person that they always fail or they never show up on time, identity gets threatened. Instead of listening to that partner's feelings, the receiving partner shifts into a counter evidence mode. The thought process becomes focused on contradicting their partner's statement. The conversation moves from resolving that issue at hand to starting a debate. As you can imagine, over time, absolutes erode emotional safety because they turn an adjustable behavior into a fixed character trait or flaw. Again, these are not patterns, these are stress response patterns, not character flaws. Don't put that label on your partner. They're likely activating out of stress. The breakdown happens in interpretation, not intention. From a gender intelligence perspective, many women use absolutes to amplify emotional impact when they feel unheard. The language communicates depth of their hurt. Many men, however, tend to process absolutes as global character criticisms, which will trigger them to get defensive and fight, or shut down or flight. This is where Byron Katie's philosophy offers a powerful pause. She teaches that all suffering begins with believing unexamined thoughts. When we say "you always" or "you never," it can be helpful to ask yourself internally, is that absolutely true? Does my partner never support me? Can I think of even one exception? This simple inquiry softens the language before it leaves your mouth. Instead of "you never listen," try "earlier tonight When I was explaining this, I didn't feel heard. Could we try it again? Instead of, you always do this, you could say, this has happened a few times recently, and it's starting to bother me a little bit. See, specificity transforms criticism into clarity. Again, it keeps the focus on the behavior, not the partner's identity. Now, if absolute language is directed towards you frequently, address the issue calmly without blame outside of the heightened moment. During your check in, you might say, hey, when I hear words like always and never, sometimes I feel like my entire character is being judged. It would help me stay open if we just focused on the specific moment instead. Or, I want to understand your frustration, but absolutes make it hard for me to listen. Would you be willing to describe a specific situation rather than using always or never? This approach combines self inquiry with clean communication. It's going to protect that emotional safety. It will reduce defensiveness. And again, keep the conversation rooted in a solvable behavior rather than a perceived permanent label. The fifth category of reactive language traps appear as minimizing or dismissive language. These statements might include, you're overreacting. It's not a big deal. Calm down. You're being too sensitive. Rather than engaging the concern, these responsives zero in on perceived significance. The emotional experience is scaled down instead of being fully understood. Now, listen, minimizing is rarely intended to invalidate your partner. More often, the speaker is trying to regulate intensity. And when pressures rise, some individuals attempt to stabilize that moment by shrinking down the problem. The hope is to reduce escalation and restore some sense of calm or keep things from becoming overwhelming. The intention is rather emotional containment. But minimizing language communicates something very different to the receiving partner. The nervous system doesn't experience it as a calming effect. It translates the behavior as experiencing dismissal. When someone's emotional reality is reduced or labeled as excessive, they may feel unseen or misunderstood. Instead of lowering the intensity, dismissing amplifies it. The partner might feel compelled to push even harder for their experience to be validated. Over time, repeated dismissal erodes emotional safety. It signals that certain feelings are not acceptable. Now, from a gender intelligence perspective, many men under stress move into problem containment and emotional stabilization. Dismissing intensity may feel like leadership or protection. Many women, however, may interpret minimization as emotional disconnection or like their partners being indifferent towards them. When one partner seeks regulation and the other seeks validation, both can feel misunderstood. These responses are stress-based processing differences. Again, they're not character flaws. Clean communication replaces dismissal with acknowledgement. Instead of you're overreacting, You could try, help me understand why this feels big to you. Instead of, calm down, you could say, I can see how this is important to you. Would you explain a little bit more? This is your opportunity to provide your partner the support they actually need by giving them a Venus talk. Acknowledgement does more than just appear to agree with your partner. It simply communicates that their emotional experience is real and worthy of attention. Validation shrinks defensiveness down more effectively than correcting their behavior. Now, if you ever feel minimized or dismissed, address the issue in a time when the conversation is no longer reactive. Are you starting to pick up on a theme here when you notice your partner pooping on the carpet? You could say, hey, when my feelings are labeled as overreacting, sometimes I feel dismissed. It would help me feel connected if you acknowledged what I'm feeling before trying to fix it. Or, I know you're just trying to calm things down, and I appreciate that. But when my feelings are minimized, I feel unheard. I think for me, I need acknowledgement first. Is that something you'd be open to working on? These requests protect that emotional safety. They create space for understanding and resolution. Now, the sixth category of reactive language traps appear as defensive justifications. We've all heard these from time to time, haven't we? These statements often include, I only did this because you did that. Or, yeah, well, you know what? You started it. Or, well, that's not what I meant. You misunderstood me. Rather than acknowledging the impact, the speaker immediately explains themselves, deflects the attention, or counters the defensiveness. The focus shifts from understanding their partner's hurt to protecting one's position. Defensive justification is rarely rooted in arrogance. More often, it's just an instinctive attempt to protect your ego. When someone feels blamed or exposed or mischaracterized, the propensity is to naturally move into self-defense. Justifying behavior provides that psychological relief from feeling wronged. The intention is to preserve self-integrity, not to damage the connection between the two of you. But defensiveness is the first rupture in connection. The moment one partner shifts into justifying their behavior, the interaction subtly moves from collaborative connection to opposition. It becomes two people protecting themselves rather than trying to protect the relationship. Defensiveness signals, I must protect myself from you. Connection signals, we've got to protect that emotional safety between us. When justification comes too quickly, the receiving partner feels unseen or dismissed. Even if the explanation is completely valid, it can feel argumentative instead of empathetic. So over time, this pattern trains the relationship towards debate instead of understanding one another. Defensiveness is the opposite of curiosity. And without curiosity, intimacy narrows. Remember, defensiveness is the first act of war. Now, from a gender intelligence perspective, many men under stress move quickly into explanation and logic. Offering context feels responsible and clarifying. Many women, however, often seek acknowledgement before explanation. When acknowledgement is skipped, she reads that as indifference or emotional distance. Clean communication restores the sequence. Acknowledgement first, explanation or clarity second. Instead of, I only did this because you did that, you could try, I could see how that affected you. And after you acknowledge their feelings and experience, then you could say, here was what was going on for me. Acknowledgement regulates the nervous system. Explanation without it escalates it. When you can help them feel heard and understood, then they're willing to hear your explanation. The order determines whether conversations feel like partnerships or combat. So if you notice defensive reactions showing up between you and your partner, address it later in a calm, intentional moment. You could say, when I share something that hurt me and that response moves quickly into explanation, I sometimes feel like we're on opposite sides. It would help me feel closer if we acknowledge the impact first. Or, listen, I definitely care about your perspective. I just need to feel understood before we jump to conclusions or sort out the details. This request is not asking for blame. It's asking for connection over defensiveness. The seventh category of reactive language traps appear as scorekeeping, or what I call ledger language. These statements often sound like, I did this for you. I'm always the one who. You don't appreciate what I do. Or, my favorite, after all I've done for you. Instead of addressing their need, the speaker references accumulated contribution. The conversation moves from present centered need or expressing what you want to a running tally. Scorekeeping is rarely about manipulation for its own sake. More often, it emerges from feeling unseen or unappreciated. When efforts go unnoticed, the mind starts to track the evidence. The ledger becomes a way of validating one's contribution. The intention is usually to feel appreciated or valued. But when contribution becomes the currency in a relationship, that partnership begins to feel transactional. The receiving partner may feel indebted rather than connected. Gratitude cannot grow freely in a relationship steeped in transactionalism. And when we command that other person make a change because they owe us, that just feels sticky. There's also a neurological layer to this. See, the brain contains a filtering system called the reticular activating system. We call it the RAS for short. Basically, it works to notice what you repeatedly focus on. Whatever you train your brain to look for, it's going to highlight. And if you start scanning your relationship for all of the ways that you're giving more, sacrificing more for the kids, or carrying more of the weight around the house, your reticular activating system will collect the evidence gladly. The more evidence it gathers, the more justified you feel. Scorekeeping subtly shifts the relationship from collaborative teamwork to competition. Instead of the we energy, it becomes a me versus you. And guess what? I'm winning. Over time, this erodes emotional safety because it frames love as an exchange rather than generosity. That starts as unnoticed effort can quietly become what John talks about in his book. He calls it resentment flu. Just a low grade infection of irritation that spreads throughout your interaction with one another. When the mind is trained to look for imbalance, imbalance is all it's going to find. Now, from a gender intelligence perspective, many women track emotional labor or indivisible contribution more acutely, especially in regards to raising the kids or creating a home or more of the relational aspects, a dynamic with the family. When those efforts go unnoticed, the urge is to highlight the differences. Now, many men, however, they might focus on those tangible contributions and may track emotional effort and may not track emotional effort in the same way. When contributions are measured differently, both partners can feel unappreciated. These differences of perception aren't intentional neglect. Clean communication replaces the ledger with direct expression of need. Instead of, after all I've done for you, you could say, I'm feeling a little unappreciated and could use a couple words of affirmation or acknowledgement. Instead of, I can't believe you always do this and I never get to have any fun. You could say, hey, I'd love more household collaboration or shared responsibility around the house, or maybe in this specific area. When you replace the focus on tallying your effort to just expressing your need, you remove that reticular activating system. Instead of scanning for imbalance, you start to notice responsiveness. You feel more appreciated and start seeing that shared contribution. Direct requests remove the strategy behind that relationship. Appreciation grows when it's invited, not extracted. And generosity helps strengthen that partnership. But transactionalism shrinks the partnership. Now, if scorekeeping language shows up frequently in your relationship, address it later on. You might say during a relationship check-in when your partner says, "Hey, how can I better support you?" Maybe you say, "When past contributions are brought up in the middle of a conflict, I feel like we're keeping tabs instead of working together. I'd like for us to just express appreciation, acknowledgement directly instead of referring to a ledger." Or, hey, babe, if you're feeling unappreciated, I really want to understand that. It helps me stay connected when your need is just expressed directly rather than through comparison. These statements zero in on connection. They protect that emotional safety. They move the relationship back into teamwork as opposed to tallying. Scorekeeping often develops when appreciation goes unspoken for a long time. When acknowledgement becomes proactive, the ledger becomes unnecessary. See, a lot of these reactive traps will be removed from your path if you just learn to appreciate your partner more, acknowledge what they do, help them feel heard, help them feel understood. When you're meeting these basic emotional needs, hopefully they won't have to utilize these poor communication requests and muck up the relationship. When you consciously decide what to look for in the relationship, like generosity, partnership, your spouse's contribution to your life, you begin to find more of that. The eighth and final category of these reactive language traps appear as sarcasm, what I like to call disguised contempt. These statements often sound like, wow, must be nice. Sure, no, take your time. Again, do whatever you want. That's fine, no problem. This the words might sound playful, but the tone carries tension. Sarcasm allows frustration to leak out while maintaining plausible deniability. It disguises criticism as a joke, as humor. It also protects the speaker's vulnerability. Sarcasm is rarely rooted in cruelty. More often, it surfaces when someone feels hurt, overlooked, they feel resentful, but maybe they don't feel emotionally safe to express their need. Therefore, joking or humor becomes the armor that provides that emotional cover. Behind sarcasm, there is an unspoken resentment, accumulated frustration that has not yet been clearly addressed. Instead of saying, hey, this isn't working, I feel hurt, I need this, we gotta change, the speaker says something clever. It feels safer to be sharp rather than being vulnerable. However, sarcasm carries contempt beneath the surface. And contempt is one of the first signs that a relationship is on its way out. It's a very corrosive emotional tone that it sets for the relationship. The nervous system detects that tone faster than it processes the words. So even if the comment is framed as a joke, the body registers hostility. Sarcasm subtly communicates superiority. It signals, I'm above this, rather than, I was hurt by this. Over time, repeated sarcasm erodes that emotional safety because it trains the relationship to anticipate the other person's critical remarks. When criticism is anticipated, partners begin bracing for impact rather than feeling safe to say what they are thinking or feeling. And when sarcasm becomes the decided outlet for resentment, resentment does not go away. It simply gets dressed up in those sarcastic, bitter remarks. Humor can bond, but sarcasm divides. This makes sarcasm particularly damaging in its ambiguity. If the receiver reacts, the speaker can retreat behind, oh, I was just joking, whatever. That double layer makes repair even more difficult because the hurt is both perceived and denied at the same time. From a gender intelligence perspective, sarcasm may surface under stress differently for men than it would for women. Many men may use sarcasm as a socially conditioned way to express frustration indirectly. Many women may experience their tone as emotional distance or subtle disrespect. Conversely, women might use sharp humor to express accumulated resentment without appearing confrontational. Men may interpret it as criticism rather than seeing that she's just expressing some hurt. But in both cases, sarcasm masks vulnerability And masked vulnerability cannot create intimacy. Clean communication removes the disguise. Instead of saying, "Wow, must be nice," you could try, "I'm feeling left out right now." Instead of an edged humor, try some clarity. "I feel disappointed, frustrated, angry, whatever, when XYZ happened." And then simply ask for what you want or need. If resentment is present, name it cleanly. "I think I've been approaching this aggression or frustration, and I think this is what I need instead." Great. Direct emotional ownership lowers defensiveness. It replaces edge with honesty. Vulnerability invites connection. Sarcasm invites division. Now, if sarcastic remarks occasionally come your way, address it outside of the context. During your check-in or when you guys have a calm moment to reflect and your partner's in a good headspace, you could ask them to change their behavior by saying, when frustration comes out through sarcasm, I feel some distance between us. I'd really like us to just directly state what we need or want, even if it's a little uncomfortable to do so. Or, "Hey, if something's building up for you, I want to hear about it clearly." Sarcasm makes it hard for me to know what's real. These requests are going to be productive because it's not about policing your partner's tone. The focus is protecting that safety and preventing resentment from going underground and becoming a root of bitterness. Sarcasm might sound light, but it carries weight. When resentment hides behind humor, intimacy slowly erodes. When vulnerability replaces that disguisement, connection can strengthen once that vulnerability is able to be present. Clean communication requires us to take a look at what we actually want and need, as opposed to disguising that. When we look at these 8 categories that we've covered in our episode today, a clear pattern emerges. Most reactive language traps aren't rooted in wrong intentions. They're rooted in feeling unregulated. The breakdown rarely comes from malice. It just comes from reactivity. And the solution is not perfection. It's replacement. It's learning to substitute reactive phrasing with clean alternatives that protect that emotional safety in real time. So before we close, I want to give you a handful of what I call courtesy cues. These are going to be short, easy, practical phrases that you can put into practice right now. These are simple, non-reactive language sentences that basically encourage more clarity, decrease defensiveness, and just help you stay connected even when the emotional stakes are high. So in each context, we'll give you a couple little examples of what you can say instead of the reactive traps. Like when it comes to making respectful requests, consider saying, "Would you please?" instead of "Can you?" or "Could you?" Would you be willing to? And then state your request. When you have time. That's nice because it takes that urgency off of your request. Or, "Hey, would you be open to?" That sort of thing. When it comes to clarifying questions, consider saying, What was going on for you? Or help me understand. Maybe, would you walk me through what you just said? Or did I understand this correctly about XYZ? When it comes to taking ownership over blame, considers those I felt or I'm feeling statements as opposed to you are doing or feeling a certain way. Or here's what came up for me. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Or hey, I could be wrong, but, and then explain your experience. When it comes to politely disagreeing with your partner or friends or family, you can use phrases like, you could be right. That hasn't been my experience. That's one way of looking at it. I see things a little bit differently. These phrases lower defensiveness, invite that intimacy, and keep two people on the same team. We just walked through 8 categories of self-protective language traps. And if you're feeling like that was a lot, you're not wrong. There's some depth here. Clean communication requires awareness, intention, and practice. No one's going to master all 8 of these traps and get out of them and have the replacements in one sitting. The goal of this episode is not perfection, it's awareness. And once you can recognize these patterns, you begin catching yourself in real time. That awareness is where change begins. So that's exactly why I've created a downloadable, clean communication guide that you can take some of these phrases away from you today. In the description box below, there's going to be a link. It's a free little booklet. Basically, it walks through very quickly about those 8 language traps. I add a couple more in. And then those little phrases of both how you can ask for what you want or need, or asking your partner to make a change, or say it this way and not that way. That's all in the guide. So it also contains these little courtesy cues paired with the appropriate context, just to give you a better understanding of how to apply them. So don't try to implement all of these at once. Practice one. Give it this a week. Then build from there. Small consistent shifts in language creates massive shifts in bringing that emotional safety over time. So download the guide, take it at your own pace, and let it become a tool that supports your growth. We've covered a lot today. 8 categories of reactive traps, what they sound like, how they land with your partner, a little bit of gender intelligence, what you can say if you're the one making the mistake, how you can bring it up to your partner and asking them to make a change. I want to leave you with one more thing. Clean communication is emotional intelligence applied. It's an awareness in motion. When you begin removing sarcasm, defensiveness, scorekeeping, absolute or rhetorical questions, something powerful happens. The nervous system of the person in front of you can calm down. Curiosity replaces conflict. Vulnerability improves and is protected. And 2 people who may feel opposed are now aligned with one another. So if you find yourself self-censoring, or if what we're talking about today was resonating with you, I encourage you to download the guide, use it as a practical tool, and if you'd like to take this step deeper, check out those 2 episodes on the relationship check-in and how to potty train your partner. Together, these tools just create a framework for not only recognizing those unhealthy patterns, but then how to repair those patterns and get out of the trap. Because healthy relationships aren't built just by avoiding conflict. They're built on navigating through the conflict with emotional intelligence. And that skill, luckily, can be learned. So I recommend you apply this insight in your relationship. If you'd like to book a complimentary coaching call with me so we can get some further clarity on what trap you and your partner fall in the most and how we can get out of it, feel free to click the link in the description box below, pick a time that works for you. And if you receive value from today's episode, I would appreciate you clicking that like button, subscribe to my channel. On a monthly basis, I produce a new relationship tool to enhance connection and improving communication. So we're going to stay connected to your partner. And this week, we're going to do that by creating a challenge. When you can pull your partner aside and have a deep, meaningful conversation, I want you to ask them a one question. Hey, how can I make it safe for you to open up to me? Let them think about it. Get back to it next week. That's a deep question. But that feedback right there, that's going to tell you what trap you guys fall in and how to get out of it.